excuse me, I just heard that you wanted to hear, he wanted you to hear about Bhagavad Gita, so I had to switch. I was going to speak on a different topic, which we previously told me to speak on. Or is the Bhagavad Gita here? Is a... Yes, okay. Okay. I'm going to chant just a little bit first. Shrimate Bhakti-Vedanta Swami Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Vijayini Vishesha Shanyavari Vastachade Satarani. So, can I have Bhagavad Gita? If I could ask who from among you are students from Boston College, could you raise your hand? Oh yes, we have a lot. You're a student from Boston College too? Really? Alumni? Yeah. Thank you for coming. I used to actually lecture every semester in Boston College, but it was quite some time ago. Probably wouldn't know the name of the professor that used to invite me, but she always had me come every semester. Trying to think how many years ago it was, probably 40 years ago. So I've heard, as presented by Vanamali Pandit, our president, that all of you are familiar or have read or looked at, or to whatever degree, Bhagavad Gita. So I thought it would be appropriate if I speak from Bhagavad Gita this evening. He had previously asked me if I would speak about deepening one's devotion during the month of Kartik, but which I wanted to speak about, but I think it would be more suitable considering we have so many students here who've started to explore, to whatever degree, some studies of Bhagavad Gita, that I would read from the Bhagavad Gita instead and speak from a verse. So I've chosen a verse from the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. The chapter is entitled Contents of the Gita Summarized, and it's text number 60. What is it? 66. nasti buddhir ayuktasya na cha yuktasya bhavana na cha bhavayata shantir ashantasya kutasukha. Translation is one who is not connected with the Supreme in Krishna consciousness can have neither transcendental intelligence nor a steady mind, without which there is no possibility of peace. And how can there be any happiness without peace? And the commentary, short commentary, I'll read as follows. Unless one is in Krishna consciousness, there's no possibility of peace. So it is confirmed in the 5th chapter, 29th verse, that when one understands that Krishna is the only enjoyer of all the good results of sacrifice and penance, that he is the proprietor of all universal manifestations, and that he is the real friend of all living entities, then only can one have real peace. Therefore, if one is not in Krishna consciousness, there cannot be a final goal for the mind. Disturbance is due to want of an ultimate goal. And one is certain that Krishna is the enjoyer, proprietor, and friend of everyone and everything, then one can, with a steady mind, bring about peace. Therefore, one who is engaged without a relationship with Krishna is certainly always in distress and is without peace. However much he may make a show of peace and spiritual advancement in life, Krishna consciousness is a self-manifested peaceful condition which can be achieved only in relationship with Krishna. Om Ajnana Timirandasya Vinanjana Salakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Mukam Karoti Vachalam Hangum Dangayate Garim Yakripa Tamaham Vande Shri Guru Dinataranam Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Iti Namane Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pacharane Nirvashesha Shanyavadi Pastichadi Satarane Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasana Gaura Bhaktivinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. This is an important verse. Chose it because I find the topic of peace is sometimes very relevant to people. Philosophy is good when it's relevant. Otherwise, one may become an armchair speculator, thinking about very high thoughts. But when it comes down to how to practically apply philosophy in a way that is meaningful, what the speaker provides some kind of solution to our day-to-day existential problems in life, it becomes relevant. And I can honestly say that in my own life, in the life of many of those with whom I associate, and in the life of those to whom many I speak, peace is generally something that people are looking for, but sometimes it seems to be quite elusive. It's not like a switch. We can find a switch to go from disturbance to peace. It'd be nice if we can just all simply have a switch to go from disturbance to peace. But if we try artificially to go from disturbance to peace, we'll find that there are many influences that happen in our life, uncontrolled, and beyond any means that we can possibly try to, although we try to control them, because one of the characteristics of life is to avoid suffering, natural. Somehow it just doesn't always seem to work. In fact, there is a verse I oftentimes quote, interestingly spoken by a 5-year-old boy, Prahlad Maharaj. And in this verse he says, in this world, every person, every materialistic person is endeavoring for happiness and he's trying to avoid distress. And therefore he acts accordingly. Actually, however, one cannot be happy as long as he endeavors for happiness, because as long as he continues for his endeavors for happiness, he's creating all those conditions for distress, which somehow seems to be let down for some of us. To hear that making endeavors for happiness is creating distress. But actually, this verse answers that. This verse answers, or addresses, we should say, that what Prahlad Maharaj is saying, that if we endeavor for happiness separate from our actual spiritual nature, we don't understand that the more we endeavor for this kind of temporary happiness, because it's temporary, ultimately it generally leads to distress. Especially we talk about in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna speaks about the reactions to one's work. He says work performed as a sacrifice to Vishnu has to be performed, otherwise work binds one to this world. Therefore he says perform your prescribed duties for his pleasure. And that way you'll remain unattached and free from bondage. I found, interestingly, I used to read a lot of philosophy books back in the 60s and 70s, and karma wasn't a very well-known word at that time. But I find that a lot of people relate to it. More younger people. I think this, in fact, I've noticed sometimes when I go to the internet, when I'm looking at YouTube for some of the things that are more related to my own Krishna consciousness, I see a lot of videos there on instant karma. And I believe probably many people understand what it means, right? Instant karma. And usually it will have, some very nice, and I shouldn't say nice, they're not so nice. But usually it has some videos of people doing something thinking that they're going to get away with it, but they don't. And they call it instant karma. But the karmic wheel works a little bit differently according to the standards which are created in this material world. The karmic wheel sometimes doesn't immediately manifest. And Prahlad Maharaj therefore says that you're endeavoring for happiness and thinking that yes, this is going to be happy, but you don't realize that if you don't know how to become happy, free from the reactions of karma, then actually you're creating future distress. You just don't see it coming around the corner at some time, at some future point in life. So, I'm not going to dwell on that topic because we want to talk about peace. But I brought up that verse only because it's something that's relevant, as we said. Everybody's looking for it. Everyone aspires to be happy, and oftentimes many of us confront circumstances in our life which are uninvited. In fact, there is a verse in the Srimad Bhagavatam, Tasyaiva heto payate kovido. which states that persons who are actually intelligent and philosophically inclined, they do not endeavor for happiness which is available even by going to the highest planet in this world, in this universe, down to the lowest planet, because they know that as far as happiness derived from sense enjoyment is concerned, it comes automatically in due course of time, just as suffering comes without asking for it. So this verse says that an intelligent person doesn't endeavor for happiness because he knows it's already allotted. It will come. Just as suffering comes without endeavoring for it. I mean, nobody here in this room wakes up in the morning and just starts to think, make plans for how will I suffer today? At least not an intelligent person thinks that. And the verse is actually addressing intelligent persons. But it comes. We make plans every morning, anticipation that it's going to, there'll be some fruit for me to enjoy at the end of the day, or there'll be some long-range fruit that will come as a result of my sacrifices. But yet, suffering comes without asking for it. So in the same way, this verse describes that happiness actually comes without asking for it. It's destined in due course of time as a result of one's previous activities. Therefore, an intelligent person endeavors neither for happiness nor for distress. An intelligent person aspires, as this verse describes, to be connected to the Supreme. The more one is connected to the Supreme, as explained in this verse, one who's not connected in Krishna consciousness, he can have neither transcendental intelligence nor a steady mind, without which there's no possibility of peace. And our spiritual master, Srila Prabhupada, explains in the commentary of this verse, he says that disturbance is due to want of an ultimate goal. And when one is certain that Krishna is the enjoyer, proprietor, and friend of everyone and everything, then one can, with a steady mind, bring about peace. So ultimate goal. We can search after temporary goals, but this verse recommends searching after an ultimate goal. It makes me thinking of another verse. I like to use this example, but it's not just a verse. Try to follow me. I like using this verse. It's relevant. Everyone can relate to it because it talks about dreams. Has anybody here ever had a dream before? Could you please raise your hand if you had a dream before? Okay, good. I have a relevant topic. Has anybody ever had a good dream before? Okay. Has anybody ever had a bad dream before? Okay. So we've hit a topic that's relevant. But it's philosophical, but it's relevant. And this verse speaks about the duality of this world. Duality, we generally think in terms of happiness, distress, honor, dishonor, heat and cold. In fact, there's another verse in Bhagavad Gita where Krishna says that one who conquers his mind, he reaches the super soul in his heart and he attains tranquility. For such a man or woman, heat and cold, happiness and distress, honor and dishonor, they're all the same. Duality, how to transcend duality. The verse that Krishna says is to conquer the mind, make the mind steady, peaceful. When the mind is steady, some of us are quite attracted to attempt to make the mind steady by some kind of yogic process. I was telling the students last night, I was speaking to a larger group of students last night who were here, that my first contact with Bhagavad Gita was when I went into a bookstore in Washington, D.C. It was in 1972. And I was looking for a book on yoga. And I opened up a book that I found sitting on the shelf. And I saw a picture of a yogi sitting in meditation. And it showed a picture of the soul coming through the body, through the different chakras of the body, coming out of the body, and ultimately going through the spiritual realm and finding shelter at the lotus feet of Radha and Krishna in the spiritual world. And when I looked at this picture of this mystic yogi sitting in meditation, I said, this looks like a good book on yoga. And I bought it. It was Bhagavad Gita as it is. But I didn't know, I had no idea. For me, it was a book on yoga. And why? Because yoga was something that I felt was a means for which one could become peaceful, controlling the mind, withdrawing the senses from sense objects. I was already exposed to many other different types of Western philosophies. My brother, stepbrother, was, at that time, he was studying transcendental meditation, and he had some influence on me, and he was also studying Buddhism, and he was telling me different books that I was reading at the time. Alan Watts was very popular back in the 60s, and I read a lot of those books. So yoga was something that I related to. So when I saw this yogi sitting there, looks like a great book of yoga, attracted to the picture, purchased Bhagavad Gita, went home, and began reading it very systematically every evening after work. And of course I discovered that it was not exactly the yoga that I thought it was. But somehow I was, I don't want to say, I was caught, captured. It's captured something that really was appealing, because I felt that it looked like everything that I was reading was relevant, even though I didn't have to sit and close my eyes with my eyes, half staring at the tip of my nose, meditating. I tried that, and I found oftentimes that I didn't last too long. And then when I read that you can do yoga without having to do that, and just change your consciousness in the way you work from your day-to-day activities, I was thinking, well, it sounds pretty good. Especially when Srila Prabhupada spoke about that Krishna consciousness means you don't have to give everything up, you just have to add something to your life. That was appealing to me, very appealing. I wasn't ready to give anything up at the time. And I thought, well, if I can add something, well, okay, I'll try it. Prabhupada used to give the analogy, if you have so many zeros, you add them up, you have zero. But if you put one in front of all those zeros, every zero becomes very significant, simply by putting one in front. You have 1 0, it's 10. If you have 2 zeros, it's 100. You have 3 zeros. The more zeros you have, the bigger it is. But without the 1, sorry, 0. So I learned from reading Bhagavad Gita that adding 1 was something that was appealing to me. And gradually I began to understand that adding 1 meant adding Krishna somehow to my life. So back to the verse about duality, dreams. I don't want to lose that because it's relevant. The verse explains that although duality of the material world ultimately does not exist, the conditioned soul experiences it as real due to its conditioned intelligence. And he gives an example. He says that when a conditioned soul dreams of something very wonderful at night, or something very horrible. Or when he daydreams of something he would like to have or something he would like to avoid. He creates a reality which has no existence beyond his imagination. I'll explain it. We'll go back to the dream. When you have a good dream, whatever you call a good dream, finally something that you've been aspiring for years, all of a sudden you get that fulfillment in your dream and you're thinking, wow, this is great. But when you wake up, then you think, oh, it was only a dream. You're sad. When you have a bad dream, okay, I tell people that, I fly a lot, and sometimes if I fall asleep in the plane in my dream, I feel that the plane is dropping very quickly. And although it's moving quite normally, and somehow in my dream it's dropping very quickly, and I'll open up and I'll look around my eyes. And usually if you have a bad dream and you come out of it, you're happy. Oh. It was a dream. But if you think about it, the sadness you experience by waking up from a good dream and the happiness that you experience from waking up from a bad dream, it wasn't connected to reality. It was connected to a dream. And happiness and sadness in this world is described that the duality of this world is described that it happens during the night. There are night dreams. And it happens during the day too, because we have daydreams of things we would like to have. If I have that, I know I'll be happy. Or things we'd like to avoid. I'll give you an example. Forgive me for speaking about this. I got COVID a couple of months ago. And when I got COVID, it wasn't so bad. And then it was just before I left India. I had been in India for 2.5 years. And the doctor told me, he took tests and said, you have plenty of antibodies, don't worry about it. He said that, because I was going to fly for I'm going back to India in just about a week or two. So I was thinking, I was relieved. I was thinking, okay, I got antibodies, what do I have to worry about? So I was relieved. Okay, I don't have to worry about it. Got enough antibodies. In fact, I went to programs, I was in big assemblies, I didn't wear a mask. Temporary though, but I felt relieved for the time being. Same thing with daydreams and daydreams. We dream of something we'd like to have. Everybody would like to avoid COVID, and something we would like to avoid. Although I know a lot of people who wanted to avoid COVID, and they thought they did everything they could to avoid it, still they got it. But they tried very hard to avoid it. Still got it. And I had my assistant was with me in India. He had come from Russia. He had 4 shots. He's thinking, but he got COVID. Of course he wasn't so sick. But we make a plan of we want to avoid suffering. Or we make a plan of how to become happy. We have a daydream of things we like to have, we like to avoid, but they're not any different than the night dreams. They're no different. Because although we may be convinced that, yes, if we get the fulfillment of our daydreams, then I'll be happy. When we get it, there's always something else. Right? Or when we get relief, we may feel some temporary relief, but then there's always we wake up some morning and something comes without asking for it. It's temporary. That's the nature of this world, the world of duality. The verse goes on to explain, therefore an intelligent person controls the mind by connecting his thoughts to Krishna. Because when his mind is thus controlled, he becomes free from this influence of duality. Why? Because he sees that behind everything there's a supreme plan maker. And that supreme plan maker is all good. And he feels peaceful, feels protected. He's able to actually confront difficulties, obstacles, in a way that he thought he would never be able to confront by an artificial way before that. By adding one thing. Just adding one thing. And that's all Srila Prabhupada taught in his philosophy. Just add one thing. You don't have to give anything up. You don't have to leave school. You don't have to give up your job. You don't have to give up your family. You don't have to renounce anything. Real renunciation is by seeing everything that exists as connected to the Supreme. Nothing exists without Him. And this is what Bhagavad Gita is teaching. This is the message Krishna was giving Arjuna. He was teaching him that Arjuna was in duality. He was thinking, if I fight, then there'll be consequences. And he didn't want to fight. And he began thinking about the consequences, and he didn't want to perform his duty. And Krishna had to enlighten Arjuna that his duty was to perform his duty thinking of him. It culminates in Bhagavad Gita by saying, in all activities just depend upon me and work under my protection. In such service, become fully conscious of me. And if you're conscious of me, you'll overcome all the obstacles of your conditional life by my assistance, by my help. He says, but if you do not become conscious of me, you act through false ego, not hearing me, you'll be lost. Ultimately, the message of Bhagavad Gita is how to seek Krishna, the Supreme, behind everything. And that's what Prabhupada is explaining in this purport. He says, if one is not in Krishna consciousness, there cannot be a final goal for the mind. Disturbance is due to want of an ultimate goal. And when one is certain that Krishna is the enjoyer, proprietor, and friend of everyone, and everything, then one can, with a steady mind, bring about peace. It comes in due course of time. It comes. It takes time. It takes practice, as in any other yogic endeavor. It takes practice. When Arjuna even said that the system of yoga that you prescribed before, he says, is very difficult. He says to conquer the mind is more difficult than trying to control the wind. And Arjuna even was trying to understand from Krishna later in the 6th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. Krishna was speaking about controlling the mind. The verse I said, for one who conquers the mind, the super soul is reached. He also says, when his mind is controlled, it's his best friend. But one who fails to control his mind, it's his worst enemy. Imagine having an enemy in the same body. An enemy, generally we think of an enemy as somebody who's an ill wisher, who's always thinking about doing something to cause us pain. He says if you fail to control our mind, it's our worst enemy. Why? It's because the mind is always looking for some relief. Where can I get relief? And we already talked about that temporality of that relief. It's there temporarily, but it doesn't give a lasting relief. In fact, there is a verse in Chaitanya Charitamrita which states that Krishna Bhakta Nishkama Atayeva Shanta. Shanta. People know this word also. Shanti. You've heard it. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Shanti means peace. Krishna Bhakta Nishkama Atayeva Shanta. Bhukti Mukti Siddhi Kami Sakali Ashanta. A devotee of Lord Krishna, he has no desires for himself. He has desires, but his desires are connected to Krishna. Krishna Bhakta Nishkama, therefore he can be peaceful. Atayeva Shanta. Bhukti, those who desire only worldly enjoyment. Mukti, even those desire who desire liberation, freedom from all suffering. Bhukti Mukti Siddhi, those who desire mystic yogic perfections. Because they desire something for themselves. Sakali Ashanta. They can't be peaceful. Why? Due to want of an ultimate goal. The self cannot be satisfied separate from Krishna. Just as if you pour water on a leaf, if you pour water on a branch, if you pour water on the trunk of a tree, they won't benefit. But when you go to the root, they all benefit. In the same way, when we try to satisfy ourselves and we don't even know who we are, make so many efforts. How can I be happy? But we don't even know who we are. It's like the example my spiritual master used to give of a person who has a very beautiful bird in a golden bird cage. And every morning he would wake up and polish the cage. So after some time, he has a beautiful cage, but a dead bird. Because he forgot to feed it. Same way, if we simply cater to the physical body, but we don't understand the needs of the self within the body, the result is that we can't be peaceful. There could be no satisfaction of the self. Self-satisfaction. Not bodily satisfaction, or mental satisfaction, but self-satisfaction. In fact, Arjuna in Bhagavad Gita said, what is the symptoms of a man who is situated in this divine consciousness? And Krishna tells him, when a person finds satisfaction in the self alone, then he is known to be in pure transcendental consciousness, self-satisfied. These are messages that Krishna tries to enlighten Arjuna about in Bhagavad Gita. He begins in the second chapter, and he begins with the most elementary teaching, fundamental teaching of which was Arjuna's teaching in the battlefield of Kurukshetra, that we are different from these physical bodies, and until we understand that I have an existence independent from the body, like the bird who's in the cage. The bird needs to be fed. Bird needs to be properly nourished, and the same way the self needs to be nourished. And if we simply satisfy the demands of the body without meeting the needs of the soul, there could be no self-satisfaction, because it's very difficult to become peaceful when the body and mind is constantly in flux, constantly changing. But when there's an ultimate goal for the mind, Krishna, who is the source of all beings, Krishna knows how to satisfy the self better than any of us do. He knows. He knows exactly what everyone needs. He is known as Govinda. Govinda means one who gives pleasure to the senses. Gives pleasure to the cows also, but gives pleasure to the senses. He's known as Hrishikesh. Hrishikesh means he's master of the senses. There's a verse, Savopada venir muktam tat paratvena nirmalam Hrishikesha Hrishikena sivna bhakti uchite. When one engages in the satisfaction of Krishna, who is Hrishikesh, the master of the senses, then automatically there's two side benefits. Savopada venir muktam, which means he becomes free from all designations, external designations. That is the first. And the second is the senses become completely controlled. Because he's Hrishikesh, he's the master of the senses. He gives a pleasure far greater than any pleasurable experience that one can get by his own efforts to satisfy his senses himself. Of course, some people think that there's definitely some wonderful pleasures which are available to all of us in this human form of life. But under most circumstances, an intelligent person will find or discover that they're temporary. They don't last, and one needs more and more and more. And it's called insatiable desire to satisfy the bodily needs. But the bodily needs can be fulfilled when one understands who is the self and how to satisfy the self. That is message that is in this verse, which I'll read the translation of again, from the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita, when Krishna instructed Arjuna. He says that one who is not connected with the Supreme in Krishna consciousness can have neither transcendental intelligence nor a steady mind, without which there is no possibility of peace, and how can there be any happiness without peace? I'll leave a few minutes in case any of you would like to ask a question about anything I've talked about this evening. Anything that you might have about, for some of you who are coming to the temple maybe for the first time, if you have questions, I can answer some of those questions right away. Sometimes people ask, what's that stuff on your forehead? In case you have that question. And it simply marks the body as a temple of God. And we help to keep ourselves conscious that the body is meant for His pleasure, and therefore we remind ourselves that this body belongs to Him, and we're inside the body and meant to be used for His service. But if you have any other temple questions, reason why I answered these questions, because as I mentioned before, I used to lecture in the colleges and universities in Boston for many years. In fact, we had what was called ISKCON Speakers Guild. And I was one of the guest lecturers that many of the heads of the different departments used to invite me to come as a guest speaker. And I would go to the theology classes, I would go to the psychology classes, I would go to sociology classes, I would go maybe even Niranjana, did you go with me in some of them? I know Bhaktavanya did. MIT. Bhaktavanya would go with me also. We went to Boston State Teachers College, which doesn't exist anymore, does it? Anyways. And I would lecture and speak on similar topics. And at the end, when I asked for questions, I always got questions like, what's the stuff on the forehead? And why you guys shave your head? What do you do for fun? That was a common question. People just couldn't relate that we get up at 3:30 in the morning and we do every day what do you guys do for fun? Yeah, that's a common. I won't answer that. I think you're more intelligent. Back then, I got a lot of questions like that. But if you have any questions, we only have 2 minutes left. Please feel free to ask.
1 minute.
Yes.
Yesterday you mentioned you told a letter about you told your sister you wanted to be a monk. So my friend, he had a question. He said, what was your reaction and your parents' reaction when you told them you wanted to be a monk, and how that formed your spiritual practice later on?
Did everybody hear the question? No. Could you say it a little bit louder? When you told your parents you wanted to be a monk, what was your reaction? What was their reaction? And how does that form your spiritual? She's asking a question. I gave a talk yesterday to about 100 college students who were here, and I told them that I recently discovered a letter that I wrote to my family in 1973, telling them that I decided to move in and become a monk and live in the temple, and if you want to come and visit me, you're welcome to come. I gave them the address, and they hadn't heard from me for quite some time, and all of a sudden, so she's asking what was their reaction and what was my reaction. Well, my parents' reaction They were a little bit shocked. As I told yesterday, they already had a hard enough time accepting that I accepted the lifestyle of a hippie. And that was difficult enough for them. But when I became a monk, it was even more difficult. And my mother, she came to the temple and asked me, "Don't you want to go back and become a hippie again?" She couldn't relate to that. How did I relate to it? Well, I don't want to say that I'm a good example, but I didn't really think so much about what my family was thinking about, because I was already separate from them for many years. I was practically out of the house when I was 13. And although I was living with them in high school, I was never home. And I was not communicating so much with them. And they became, I say they, it was my mother and my stepfather. My mother remarried when I was 10. And so for me it was a decision I wanted to make. And I knew that they would have a hard time with it. And I'll even tell you something else. I don't speak about it so publicly, but this was popular back in the early 70s. They have these deprogrammers. I don't know if you've heard about them before. Deprogrammers that would go out. There was Ted Patrick was his name. He's since expired, but he and many other people, they used to think that we were, that we were a dangerous cult. And in fact, I'm smiling because I once went to, there's two stories here. I once went to, was it Boston State Teachers College? Can't remember. Anyways, I went to Boston State Teachers College, and I was asked to come and give a lecture. I was asked to come and answer questions. And the student met me and brought me up to the front of the class and said, "Please sit here and just wait until you're called." And I sat in the front, and there was a panel of 4 people and they all had a so-called cult designated that they were supposed to do research for, and they all gave all their evidence. It was a health education course. They all gave their evidence of how dangerous these different cults were. And I was brought in, I didn't know it, I was caught blindsided. I was brought in as a cult specimen. So I was listening to the whole thing, and they said, "You'll get your chance to speak." So they said, "Okay, now you can go up and just answer the questions." So I began to speak, and I said, "You don't understand. How can you put me up front like this for me to hear those things? What, you don't even know what is the difference between a cult and a religion. How can I answer questions without explaining to you what is it?" And the teacher got very upset. He said, "That's not why we invited you here, right? Just do what you're asked to do. Take questions." I said, "No, how can I take questions? I just heard for so long about that. What you don't even know what's the difference between the cult and the religion. I have to tell you." And I kept on speaking. And the professor, he said, "Be quiet, be quiet." And one student got up and she slammed her fist against the table and said, "Let him speak." And another student got up and said, "Yeah, let him speak." And before I know it, all these students were getting up saying, "Let him speak, let him speak." And the professor, he kind of slithered back down in his seat. And I spent the rest of the time explaining what is the difference between a cult and a religion. And then after the class was over, everybody came up and was taking books, they were taking prashadam, and the other professor for the health education course across the hall was listening to me. He said, "Can you come from my class tomorrow?" They didn't know. So my mother didn't know. And my parents somehow had come under the influence of thinking that their son had been kidnapped by a dangerous cult. And they were ready to mortgage the house to have me kidnapped. And my stepbrother called me and warned me, be careful. They're planning to mortgage the house so they can have you kidnapped. I dealt with it. It was not, but that's how my mother thought. But she came to accept it. It took some time, and she came to accept my son as a religious person. And she, although it was difficult for her, he knows. Rohini Nanda, he knew my mother. Rohini Nanda was like her second son. She was so happy to see him. So, does that answer your question? Yes? Sorry. I have a tendency to go off track. But I thought it was relevant. Forgive me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ISKCON Boston. This is my third time here in person, and President Vanamali Dasa has spoken to my class on Zoom during COVID-19. And every time that my students have an experience with ISKCON Boston, they're just so happy to actually see the Bhagavad Gita come to real life. We talk about the Gita in class. And so to see actual people who believe and welcome us into their home is always really powerful and meaningful for my students. And I have them write papers after this experience. We also go to a Christian ritual, and they write about what speaks to their heart and what they find inspiring. And there are always so many elements of ISKCON Boston, like the kirtan, the dancing, but also hearing from the Gita from someone else other than me is really, really important for my students. I'm really grateful. Thank you.
Certainly a lot more intimate than what I'm used to. The speaker was very personable, very friendly, and the examples were very relevant and touched us deeply. As a young man, he talked about his experience as a young man and becoming a guru in his journey into becoming who he is. And I think that speaks to all of us as college students, learning to become who we're meant to be. So that was touching, and the music and dancing was far more communal and certainly more joyous than what I may be used to coming up from a Western upbringing where it's very austere and a little bit more intimidating. So I was blessed to be acquainted with this very new way of worship.
I think it was the one thing that I would say it was joyful. Like the entire time, I was really having fun. I think the dancing, it felt so light, and I felt like when he was speaking, I didn't even notice the time go by. I was just so entranced by what he was saying, and I would definitely come back again, and I really look forward to it.
Yeah, personally, it's hard to put into words, but all I can say is I haven't been able to stop smiling since it ended. Being able to make physical contact and while the chanting was going on and look people in the eyes and just see people so upbeat, and we're all here celebrating something together, like Calvin said, so intimate, and that was new to me, and I'm gonna leave here smiling probably for the rest of the night, so thank you.
Great. It was beautiful. Everything here is beautiful. I never had a more enjoyable session in my entire life. I can't wait to come back next Sunday to experience all this all over again. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, it was electrifying. It was energizing. Just everybody there together, dancing. Definitely a bright part of the day for sure. So thank you. Yeah, it was great.
Yeah, I mean, like my friend just said, there's a lot of energy in the room. It was a lot of fun. Kind of got pulled in, but I loved it anyway, and I would definitely do it again.
So I'm Hindu myself, and I've never had an experience like this at a temple. So it was really something new and amazing, and I'll definitely come back here. So thank you.
Hi, that was a really interesting experience. I mean, it was very cool to have such cultural immersion, and I'm very grateful for all of you guys to have us. And thank you so much. I'm very, very, very grateful.
Hi, my name's Natasha. This was an experience full of inclusivity and a welcoming community, and it was a really great experience.